So I think it's good we start with Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, maliki yawm al-din, iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'een, ihdinas as-sirata al-mustaqim, sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim, ghayril maghdubi alayhim wa lad-dallin, sadaqallahu al-'aliyyul 'azim. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعن الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. So with this session we continue to weave the vibrant thread of our discussion on the ninth Imam, finding ourselves once again guided by the echoes of our past reflections. The foundational principle of our study remains unchanged. Each session builds upon the last, weaving together into a larger interconnected tapestry. In our last gathering, we stood in the luminous presence of Imam Muhammad ibn Ali al-Jawad, peace and blessings be upon him, witnessing his God-given wisdom that defied age, his courage that unmasked a pious tyrant, and his intellectual jihad that triumphed in the courts of power. That history of the Imam's public confrontation, of his role as the Imam of Clarity, is the very context in which our next session, today's session, must be understood. For the Imam's mission was not only to be a public proof or a hujjah for the world, but also a private refuge, a Hirz, for his followers. Today, we turn our hearts towards this more intimate dimension of his generosity, exploring the spiritual shield he gifted his people and the legacy of his protection. His story is not complete without understanding this act of profound spiritual care. It is a story of the Imam as a guardian, a protector who understood the fears of his people and provided them with a fortress of faith. It is a story of divine protection, of the theology of Reliance, Tawakkul, and of the true meaning of supplication that has been a shield for the believers for centuries. With the epic of the Imam of Clarity fresh in our minds, let us now turn to the story of the shield of the Ummah. In his most beautiful name and with full trust in his support, imploring his assistance and guidance, we proceed. Please give me a salawat and we'll have a very brief recap of the previous session.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وأجل.
So in our last session, we had the honor of exploring the life of the ninth Imam, Muhammad al-Jawad, through the lens of him being the Imam of Clarity, as we said. His tragically short life served as a masterclass in divine leadership, unfolding across three foundational lessons. Firstly, a wisdom beyond years. We began by reflecting on the profound test of faith his Imamah presented. At only 8 years old, his appointment shattered the community's conventional understanding of leadership, which was based on age and experience. We learned that his youth was, in and of itself, a divine sign, forcing believers to purify their allegiance and anchor it not in worldly criteria, but in God's direct designation, which we say is Nas. His miraculous innate knowledge, which left the great scholars speechless, was a living testament to the Qur'anic precedents set by Prophet John the Baptist, Yahya ibn Zakaria, who was also granted wisdom while still a child. Number 2, unmasking the pious tyrant. Next, we analyze the sophisticated political traps set by the Abbas al-Khalif Ma'mun. We examined his strategy of the gilded cage, summoning the young Imam to Baghdad and marrying him to his daughter. This was a calculated move to neutralize the Imam's influence, co-opt his divine authority, and legitimize the corrupt Abbasid regime under the veneer of piety. We saw how Imam Jawad brilliantly navigated this plot, living within the palace walls but never becoming of the palace, and using the tyrant's own court as a platform to expose his hypocrisy. And number 3, the jihad of the word. Finally, we delved into the Imam's primary method of resistance, intellectual jihad. The centerpiece of our discussion was his legendary debate with the chief judge of the empire, Yahya ibn Akhtam. We saw how the Imam achieved the stunning victory, not by merely answering a complex question, but by completely deconstructing it into more than a dozen different scenarios. This was not a display of rote learning, but a manifestation of comprehensive divine wisdom, proving that the most potent weapon against falsehood is the overwhelming light of irrefutable proof and clarity. Having established his role as the Imam of Clarity, who generously distributed the treasures of his knowledge, we now turn to a different, more intimate dimension of his generosity, the shield he provided for his people. Again, in his most beautiful name, with full trust and reliance on his guidance and support, we proceed on our journey towards him and his beloved ones. Please give me a salawat and we begin.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Before we delve into the story of the Hirz, we must first establish its foundations in the immutable words of the Holy Qur'an. The concept of seeking divine protection through a sacred means is not an innovation. It is a principle deeply rooted in the divine revelation, resting on three pillars: God's promise of protection, his command to supplicate, and his assurance to those who rely on him. Firstly, the ultimate source of all protection is God himself. He is al-Mu'min, the grantor of security, al-Muhaymin, the overseer. To his chosen guides, he makes a direct and explicit promise of protection from worldly harm. The most powerful expression of this divine guarantee is given to the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him and his family. And we find it in Surah al-Ma'idah of the Quran, the chapter of the table spread, 5th chapter of the Quran, verse number 67, where God says, "And God will protect you from the people." Now let's pause on the key Arabic word over here. Ya'simuka. He will protect you. This word comes from the root Ain Sad Mim. This root carries the core meaning of to safeguard, to make immune, to preserve, and to hold back from harm. From this very same root, we derive the critical theological term isma, and also the term ma'sumiyya and even ma'sumi. So when we speak of the prophets and the imams having isma, we are speaking of a state of being divinely protected from sin and error. The verse is a direct promise from God to the prophet of this specific divine safeguarding. Now, what is the nature of this protection? In Tafsir al-Mizan, Allama Tabatabai explains that in this context, it is not a promise to prevent all personal hardship, but an absolute guarantee that no human power will ever be able to stop the divine message from reaching its completion. Allama says, the meaning of isma is the divine protection related to the conveying of the message, such that people will have no power to nullify it or extinguish its light by killing the prophet or harming him in a way that prevents him from delivering it. The verse does not negate all harm, but rather the harm that would reach the point of invalidating the call of the mission. The Hirz of Imam al-Jawad, therefore, is a reflection of this promise, a tangible means through which the believer can seek refuge in that same divine power that protects the core of the faith itself. Secondly, God does not offer just protection. God does not just offer protection. He commands us to actively seek it through supplication or dua. The act of calling upon him is the essential cord that connects the servant to the Lord. The promise of an answer is absolute, tied only to the sincerity of the call. In Quran, in Surah al-Ghafir, the chapter of the forgiver, 40th chapter of the Quran, verse number 60, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Call upon me, I will answer you." The Hirz is a pre-formulated, divinely inspired supplication. It is a perfect dua, crafted by an infallible imam. that gives the believer the most beautiful and effective words with which to call upon God. It is a divine script for seeking help. Third, the entire system of divine protection and supplication rests on the foundational principle of absolute reliance or tawakkul on God. The protection of the Hirz is not activated by the ink on the page, but by the certainty in the heart of the one who carries it. The Quran gives the ultimate assurance to those who place their complete trust in Him. In the Quran, Surah Al-Talaq, the chapter of the divorce, 65th chapter of the Quran, verse number 3, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "And whoever relies on God, then He is sufficient for him." Ayatollah Jawadi Amali, in Tafsir Tasneem, explains that tawakkul is not passivity. It is the highest form of spiritual action. It is to tie one's camel and then entrust the outcome to God. Ayatollah Jawadi says, tawakkul is that a person does not neglect the ordinary means, but does not attach their heart to them, knowing that the only true cause is God. The transmitted supplications, like the Hirz of Imam al-Jawad, peace and blessings be upon him, are among the best spiritual means that connect a person to this true state of reliance. The Hirz, therefore, is a practical tool for building this reliance. It is a constant physical reminder that our ultimate sufficiency comes only from Him. With these three Quranic pillars in place, we can now explore the story of how this fortress of faith was gifted to the Ummah. Please give me a salawat, and we go to the first point, which is a fortress in a time of fear, the story of the Hirz.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
To truly understand the gift of the Hirz, we must transport ourselves first to the world in which it was given. The era of Imam Muhammad ibn Ali al-Jawad was a time of escalating pressure and pervasive fear. The sophisticated hypocrisy of Ma'mun Abbasi had given way to the overt and brutal hostility of Khalifs like al-Mutasim. The Imam was a virtual prisoner, held under constant surveillance in Baghdad, and his followers, the Shia, were a persecuted community, watched, marginalized, and often punished for their allegiance. This atmosphere of fear was not abstract. It was a daily reality of survival. The state actively sought to sever the bond between the Imam and his followers. In such a world, the need for protection was a pressing concern, a desperate pressing concern even. Believers sought not only intellectual guidance from their Imam, but also a spiritual refuge from the anxiety and danger and worry that surrounded them. It is from this crucible of fear and faith that the story of the Hirz emerges. The great scholar Sayyid ibn Tawus, in his treasured book of supplications, which is titled The Spirits of Supplications and the Methods of Worship, records the beautiful narration of how this fortress of words was bestowed. Sayyid ibn Tawus says, "It is narrated that after the Khalif Ma'mun had married his daughter al-Fadl to Imam Jawad, peace and blessing be upon him, the Khalif was in a constant state of rage against the Imam, resentful of his lofty status and virtue. One day, when Ma'mun's heart was filled with anger, the Imam, peace and blessings be upon him, wrote this Hirz for one of his trusted companions to carry, so that it might be for him a fortress, hisn, from calamities and tribulations. The Imam said to him, 'Place it inside a silver tube and keep it on your persons.'" And the reference, of course, is in the write-up. This story is profoundly moving. It shows the Imam himself being a target of the tyrant's rage, thinking not of his own safety, but of the safety of his followers. His response to the threat of worldly power was a gift to his people, a direct link to the ultimate power of God. He did not give them a sword, but a supplication. He did not offer a political strategy, but a spiritual sanctuary. The text of the Hirz he bestowed is a masterpiece of concise and powerful devotion. The short version, which has been carried by believers for centuries in rings or in little chains, is a direct appeal to God through his most luminous attributes. It reads, O light, O proof, O manifest, O illuminating, O Lord, suffice me against the evils and calamities of time, and I ask you for salvation on the day the trumpet is blown. And all the references for this are in the write-up. Notice the beauty and depth of this prayer. It begins by invoking God as the absolute source of all light, proof, and clarity, the very things that dispel the darkness of fear and confusion. It then asks for two levels of protection: sufficiency against the evils and calamities of time, that being worldly protection, and more importantly, salvation on the day the trumpet is blown, the ultimate protection in the hereafter. Let's now look at the Hirz being a banner of Tawhid and not an idol. So here we must pause to confront a profound and dangerous misunderstanding. Some, out of ignorance or malice, look upon the practice of carrying a Hirz and label it shirk or polytheism, claiming that it is a reliance on a created object instead of on the creator. This is a falsehood built on a complete misrepresentation of Islamic theology. The Hirz is not an amulet with inherent magical power. It is a banner of pure Tawhid or monotheism. Its power does not reside in the parchment or the silver casing, but in the words written upon it, and, more importantly, the intention within the heart of the one who carries it. The Quran itself establishes the principle of seeking blessings or tabarruk through sacred objects linked to God's chosen ones, not as idols, but as conduits of divine mercy. When the sons of Prophet Jacob, Yaqub, brought him the shirt of Prophet Joseph, Yusuf, he did not cast it aside as an idol. He touched it to his face. In Quran, Surah Yusuf, the chapter of Prophet Joseph, 12th chapter of the Quran, verse number 96, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and when the bearer of good tidings came, he cast it over his face and he became seeing. Was the Prophet Jacob, Yaqub, committing shirk or polytheism? Of course not. He understood that the shirt was not the source of the cure, but it was the means or wasila, saturated with the grace of a prophet, through which God's healing power was manifest. The Hirz functions on the same principle. It is a physical anchor for a spiritual reality. The great Gnostic or Arif and philosopher of our time, Ayatollah Hassan Zadeh Amali, who was renowned for personally writing the Hirz of Imam al-Jawad on deerskin for believers to be placed in rings and in little things, understood this reality perfectly. He taught that the physical act of writing and carrying the Hirz is a way of engraving the remembrance of God onto the soul. Ayatollah Hassan Zadeh says, the act of writing and carrying a Hirz is not merely a physical act, but an embodiment of remembrance or dhikr and seeking a means or tawassul. These luminous words, which have emerged from the heart of an infallible, place a person within the impenetrable fortress of God. Shirk is to seek help from other than God, but the Hirz is the very essence of seeking help from God through the words of his chosen friends, his awliya. This is in fact pure Tawhid or pure monotheism. The Hirz is a common reminder. In a moment of fear, The believer feels the silver casing on their arm and remembers the words within. They remember the Imam who gifted it. And through that memory, they remember God, the ultimate protector. The physical object is a tool for spiritual focus, pointing the heart away from the immediate threat and towards the eternal source of all security. Let's now look at a call to clarify. A banner of Tawhid, not an idol of Shirk. Here, our first clarification must be decisive. We must educate ourselves and our communities and our loved ones to understand the profound difference between a tool of Tawhid and an idol of Shirk. An idol is an object worshipped as an independent source of power. The Hirz is the exact opposite. It is a declaration that there is no power except God's. It is a written supplication, a banner of resilience, and a gift from the Imam that constantly reorientates the heart back to the Creator. Furthermore, the story of the Hirz teaches us that the Imam's leadership is holistic. A true divine guide does not only provide abstract theological rulings, he ministers to the complete human being. When his followers were afraid, Imam al-Jawad not only gave them direct guidance on virtues like patience and reliance and resistance, but also gifted them a practical tool with which to find refuge in with God. Our duty, therefore, is to clarify that carrying a Hirz is not an act of superstition, but a sophisticated spiritual practice of remembrance and reliance, demonstrating that the Imamah is a source of both profound teaching and active spiritual refuge. Please give me a salawat and we move to the second point, which is the fortress of faith, understanding the theology of the Hirz.
اللهم صل على
اللهم صل على محمد وآل
محمد.
So having understood the story of why the Hirz was given, we must now delve into the profound question of what it is. This is the theological heart of our discussion. The word Hirz in Arabic literally means fortress, a sanctuary, a refuge, or a fortified place. The Hirz of Imam al-Jawad, therefore, is a spiritual fortress, a sanctuary of words gifted by the Imam to protect the believer. This concept is not alien to our belief, to our faith. Indeed, it is woven into its very fabric. Let's look at the Qur'anic principle of spiritual protection. Why does a believer instinctively recite the verse of the throne, al-Kursi, when they feel anxious or afraid? Everyone knows the verse of the throne. God, there is no God but him, the ever-living, the sustainer of all existence. Neither drowsiness nor sleep overtakes him. To him belongs whatever is in the heavens and whatever is on the earth. Who could intercede with him except by his permission? He knows what is before them and what is behind them, and they encompass nothing of his knowledge except what he wills. His throne extends over the heavens and the earth, and safeguarding them both does not weary him. He is the most high, the most great. There shall be no compulsion in religion. The right path has become clearly distinct from error. So whoever rejects tyrannical forces and believes in God has grasped the most trustworthy handhold, which will never break. And God is all-hearing, all-knowing. God is the protector of those who believe. He brings them out of darkness into light. As for those who believe, their protectors are tyrannical forces who lead them out of light into darkness. These are the inhabitants of the fire, and they will abide therein eternally. And of course, this is from Surah Al-Baqarah, the chapter of the cow, second chapter of the Quran, verses 255 to 257. Why do we teach our children to recite the 4 quls before sleeping? These sacred verses, Surah Al-Kafirun, the chapter of the disbelievers, Surah Al-Ikhlas, the chapter of sincerity or Tawhid, Surah al-Falaq, and Surah al-Nas. They too are fortresses of remembrance. And you can find all of these verses, of course, in the Quran. It's verses 109, chapters 109, 112, 113, and 114 of the Quran. They do not merely protect through sound or ritual, but through their meaning. Each one recenters the heart upon the oneness and sovereignty of God. Does the power lie in the sound waves of our voice? No. The power lies with God, and these verses are our divinely prescribed means to refocus our hearts and turn towards Him as the only true source of security. Let's now look at words as living fortresses. The great Arif and scholar and jurist even, Ayatollah Bahjat, may God rest his pure soul, explained this phenomenon beautifully, teaching that the words of the Quran and Ahlulbayt are living conduits of divine power. Ayatollah Bahjat says, words of the Quran and the supplications of the infallibles, peace and blessings be upon them all, possesses a creative power, what we call qudrat al-takwiniyah. They are not mere utterances, living realities that have an effect on the universe. When you recite al-Kursi with faith and attention, or the verse of the throne with faith and attention, you are in reality placing yourself within the divine fortress. The Hirz is exactly the same. Let's now look, and of course the references in the write-up. Let's now look at the symbol and the source. The same principle extends to the well-established Islamic tradition of wearing specific rings, not as charms, but as reminders and conduits of blessing. The most beloved of these is the aqiq, or the cornelian stone. Sheikh al-Sadiq says, wear a ring on your right hand, for it is a virtue from God, the mighty and the majestic. For those brought near to him, Imam Ali asked, Prophet said, Imam Ali asked, O Messenger of God, with what stone should I adorn my ring? And the Prophet replied, with the red Yemeni aqiq, for it was the first stone to affirm the unity of God, the oneness of God, of my prophethood, and of your successorship, O Ali. Another narration from Imam al-Sadiq adds, the aqiq is a protection or a hirz during a journey. And of course, the references are all in the write-up. Similarly, the ring of hadith zini, hematite, is recommended in times of fear or when facing a tyrant. It is not that the stone has power, but that wearing it with the correct intention and supplication serves as a shield. Over here, Ayatollah Misbah, may God rest his pure soul, clarifies the theology behind such acts. He says, certain objects are symbols and signs that draw a person's attention towards spiritual realities. When a person wears an aqiq ring or carries a hirz, this external object acts as a reminder and causes him to remember God and his chosen friends, the awliya. This is not shirk. This is using means to strengthen remembrance and attentiveness. The value is in the remembrance it triggers, not in the object itself. And of course, the references in the write-up. And finally, let's look at the Qur'anic defense against misunderstanding. The accusation that using such sacred objects is a form of shirk or polytheism collapses when confronted with the Quran itself, and we discussed this earlier, but I want to re-emphasize it. The Holy Book establishes the principle of seeking blessing, tabarruk, from objects connected to God's chosen guides. And by far the most powerful example is the story of Prophet Joseph and his father, Prophet Jacob, Yusuf and Yaqub. In the Quran, Surah Yusuf, the chapter of Joseph, Prophet Joseph, 12th chapter of the Quran, verses 93 and 96, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, take this shirt of mine and cast it over the face of my father. He will regain his sight, This is what Prophet Yusuf said. And when the bearer of good tidings came, he cast it over his face and he became seeing. Was the great prophet of God committing shirk or polytheism by seeking cure from a shirt? Of course he wasn't. He understood that the shirt on its own has no power. Rather, it was a conduit of divine mercy, a physical object saturated with the grace of another prophet, in fact, a wali, who had a greater authority than Jacob, through which God's healing power chose to manifest. Allama al-Tabari explains this principle in Tafsir al-Mizan. He says, in this story, there is a clear proof for the permissibility of seeking blessings or tabarruk from the relics of the prophets and the righteous servants of God. For the shirt was nothing but a relic of Prophet Joseph. Yet God brought about the cure through it. This does not mean that the shirt was the healer. Rather, God is the healer. But he made this relic an apparent cause, or what we call sabab, for his mercy. And the reference, of course, is in the write-up. The Hirz functions on this very principle. It is not the words, the paper, or the ink that protect, but the divine remembrance they awaken and the spiritual connection they invoke. Let's now look at the sacred logic of means. These practices, along with the Hirz, are part of a larger theological principle, using sanctioned physical means to achieve a spiritual state. And the most profound example of this is the earth or turba of Karbala. We do not worship the clay or the earth. We place our foreheads, the highest part of our body, upon the dust associated with the greatest sacrifice for Tawhid. And in that act of humility, we prostrate to God alone. Sheikh al-Kursi has said, prostration on the soil of Al-Hussein, meaning the soil of Karbala, pierces the 7 veils. And the reference is, of course, in the write-up. The soil is not the goal. It is a gateway. The ring is not the protector. It is a reminder of the protector. And the Hirz is not a talisman. Rather, it is a school of Tawhid, of monotheism. Let's now look at this school of Tawhid or monotheism. Imam Khomeini, may God rest his pure soul, powerfully categorized all such devotional acts as tools for awakening the heart. He writes in his book, The Disciplines of Prayer, and of course the full references in the write-up, he says, the transmitted supplications of the Imams of guidance, peace and blessings be upon them, in addition to being a treasure trove of divine knowledge, are a means of connection to the truth, the exalted, and a school of monotheism, Madrasa Tawhid. These are not superstitions. They are realities meant to awaken hearts from the sleep of heedlessness or negligence. Every word of the Hirz proves this. It is a prayer directed exclusively to God. It begins, O light, O proof. It continues, O Lord, suffice me. It ends with a plea for salvation. It is a symbol of pure Tawhid from the beginning to the end. Let's now look at our next call to clarify, a school of Tawhid in your hand. So over here, our second clarification is vital. We must train ourselves and our communities and our loved ones to see the Hirz, the Aqiq ring, the Hadith theme ring, the Turba, all of these not as magical charms, but as components of a sophisticated spiritual system. They are all portable schools of monotheism. Their purpose is to constantly refocus the heart towards God. When you feel the Hirz, you are reminded of its words. When you glance at your Aqiq ring, you are reminded of the covenant of Tawhid that the ring, the stone itself, has accepted. When you touch your head to the Turba, you are reminded of the sacrifice for God. Our duty is to clarify that these are tools for perfecting reliance or tawakkul, physical anchors for a spiritual reality that says in every moment, my sufficiency is from God alone. Let's now look at carrying the fortress. This is the next point. No. Let's look at carrying the fortress, the etiquette and spirit of the Hirz. So, having explored the story and the profound theology of the Hirz, we arrive at the final dimension, the practice. How does a believer carry the fortress? The teachings of Ahlulbayt provide us with a beautiful and deep etiquette or adab for this devotional act. This etiquette reveals that the Hirz is not a passive object to be worn, but an active covenant to be entered into, requiring both external purification and internal sincerity. Please give me a loud salawat, and we will look at the external etiquette, a preparation of the soul.
اللهم صل
اللهم
على
صل على
محمد
محمد وآل
محمد
محمد
وعجل فرجه.
The classical sources that narrate the story of the Hirz also describe a set of recommended actions for preparation. These steps are not mere ritual. They are spiritual processes designed to prepare the believer to receive this divine gift with the reverence that it deserves. The full narration, as recorded in Muhaj al-Du'at by Sheikh Sayyedah, specifies a beautiful sequence of purification and prayer. It says, when you intend to carry it, first pray 4 units of prayer. In the first unit, recite Surah al-Fatiha once and Surah al-Fath 7 times. In the second, recite Surah al-Fatiha once and Surah al-Qadr 7 times. In the third, recite Surah al-Fatiha once and Ayat al-Kursi 7 times. And in the fourth, recite Surah al-Fatiha once and Surah al-Nasr 7 times. When you have given the salutations to complete the prayer, then write the Hirz on a skin of a deer and place it inside a silver tube. This preparatory prayer is in itself a profound lesson. But why such specific steps? Why the purification and the prayer? It is to create a state of spiritual receptivity. You cannot receive a divine gift with a heedless heart. Imam al-Jawad explains the deep philosophy behind such ritual preparations. He teaches that just as a farmer must prepare the soil before planting a seed, a believer must first prepare their soul before receiving a divine effusion of grace. He says, just as we prepare and cleanse our house to receive a dear guest, so too must the soul be prepared to receive divine guidance or faith. Purification, prayer, and attentiveness of the heart, these are all preparations of the soul. These are the etiquettes that increase a person's existential capacity to receive the special mercy of God. Without this readiness, even the greatest of mercies may remain entirely ineffective, just as rain has no effect upon a hard stone. This powerful analogy clarifies everything. The etiquette of the Hirz is not a set of arbitrary rules. It is the spiritual act of tilling the soil of the soul, making it soft and ready to receive the divine seed, the seed of divine protection. The physical purification of wudu, ablution, symbolizes a spiritual cleansing, and the prayer is a conscious act of turning one's attention fully to the source of all power. You cannot receive a divine fortress while your heart is made of hard stone. Let's now look at the internal spirit, soul of the action. This external etiquette, however beautiful, is merely the vessel. The true power, the very soul of the Hirz, lies in the internal spirit of the one who carries it. The most meticulously prepared Hirz, carried with a heedless or insincere heart, is little more than a silver ornament. Its spiritual effect is unlocked only by the key of sincerity or ikhlas and genuine reliance or tawakkul. This is the foundational principle of all Islamic worship, as established by the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, in one of his most famous declarations. He says, "Verily actions are but by intention, and for every person is what they intended." The Hirz is a physical action, but its value is determined by the intention behind it. If the intention is to rely on a physical object, that act is hollowed out. But if the intention is to use this object as a constant reminder to rely on God, the act becomes a profound expression of Tawhid or monotheism. The purpose of carrying a Hirz is not to forget about God, but to make forgetting him impossible. Imam Khamenei, may God protect him, in explaining the spirit of devotional acts, emphasizes this very point. The outward form of a ritual is designed to cultivate an inward reality. Imam Khamenei says, and again the references are in the write-up, but these are based on lectures that Imam Khamenei gave regarding the Quran back in 1970s. Imam Khamenei says, "The spirit of worship is attentiveness and the presence of the heart. If this attention is absent, the action will be a lifeless shell. Supplications and remembrances are tools to create this state of presence. The goal is not the words themselves, but the spiritual state that these words create in the heart. Therefore, the true etiquette of carrying the Hirz is to carry it with a heart that is present. When you feel its weight on your arm, it should trigger a state of remembrance. It should remind you of the Imam's generosity, of the beautiful words of supplication it contains, and above all, of God's promise to be sufficient for the one who relies upon him. It transforms a simple physical sensation into a moment of active spiritual reorientation, a moment of refocusing." Let's now look at our call to clarify the spirit before the symbol. Here, our third clarification is paramount. We must teach and understand that the etiquette of the Hirz is not a superstitious checklist, but rather it is a program for spiritual cultivation. The physical acts of purification and prayer are the outer shell, but the kernel, the soul of the matter, is the internal state of sincerity and presence of heart. Our duty is to clarify that carrying the Hirz is an active commitment, not a passive possession. It is to carry a reminder of our covenant of reliance on God. The symbol on our arm is only as powerful as the spirit within our hearts. Please give me a salawat, and we go to the last point, which is a sanctuary of purity, the mother of the 10th light.
اللهم صل على
صل على
محمد وآل محمد
آل محمد.
The story of the Hirz reveals how Imam al-Jawad created a spiritual fortress for his followers amidst a world of hostility. Yet God, in his infinite mercy, also provided the Imam himself with a sanctuary, a home blessed with the tranquility, piety, and purity that stood in stark contrast to the barren political theatre of his marriage to al-Fadl, the daughter of Ma'mun. While that union, imposed by the Khalif, remained childless and was a source of trial, the sacred light of the Imamah was destined to continue. While the court buzzed with the politics of his royal marriage, Imam Jawad was engaged in a far more sacred selection process, guided not by worldly strategy, but by divine foreknowledge. The story of her selection is itself a profound miracle, a testament to the Imam's divine foreknowledge. The historian al-Mas'udi records, and again the references all in the write-up, al-Mas'udi says, it is narrated that Abu Ja'far, meaning Imam Jawad, peace and blessings be upon him, informed one of his agents that on the next day a slave merchant would arrive with a group of bondswomen. He gave the agent a precise description of one of them and instructed him to purchase her with a specific amount of money. When the next day came, the merchant arrived with the bondswoman, and one of them matched the exact description that Abu Ja'far, peace and blessings be upon him, had given. The agent therefore purchased her, and she was the mother of Abu al-Hasan, Imam al-Hadi, peace and blessings be upon him. This was not a random choice. The Imam provided a description of her, indicating that he already knew of her existence and her divine destiny through the light of his Imamah. This act itself is a profound miracle. When the Khalif chose his daughter to serve his own ambitions, the Imam, guided by God, sought out a pure soul destined to serve the ambitions of heaven. The agent found Sayyedah Sumanah, a noble lady from the region of al-Maghrib, which is North Africa, and she was brought into the Imam's household. Upon entering the Imam's sacred household, Sayyedah Sumanah's innate purity and devotion blossomed. She was not known for worldly status, but rather for her spiritual rank. The historical sources are unanimous in their praise of her character, describing her as one of the most ascetic and devout women of her time, constantly engaged in fasting and worship and helping others. She was known as one of the abidat, devout worshippers, and qanat, obedient servants of God. Her entire being was oriented towards God, making her the perfect spiritual environment to nurture the next Imam. Upon entering the Imam's sacred household, Sayyedah Sumanah's innate purity and devotion truly blossomed. She was stepping into an environment that was not just a home, but a living sanctuary of divine remembrance, a stark contrast to the worldly court of the Khalif. The household of an Imam is a practical school of monotheism, where every action and every word is oriented towards God. Ayatollah Misbah, may God rest his pure soul, explains this reality, noting that the homes of the Ahlulbayt were epicenters of spirituality that naturally nurtured souls of the highest caliber. He says, the house of an infallible Imam, peace and blessings be upon them, is not merely a residence. It is an epicenter of monotheism, Qanun Tawhid, and a center for the manifestation of the divine names. Anyone who entered this space was exposed to the breezes of divine mercy. The women who became the wives of the Imams, if they possessed a pure spiritual disposition, found this environment to be the best ground for their spiritual growth and perfection. And the reference, of course, is in the write-up. It was in this perfect spiritual environment that Sayyedah Sumanah's piety flourished, making her the ideal vessel to nurture the next divine proof. It is this profound devotion that her own son would later bear witness to with his powerful words. Let's now look at the vessel of divine light. Sayyedah Sumanah was not of royal lineage, but her nobility was of a much higher order. She was known as one of the qanat, the most devout and ascetic women of her time. Historical sources describe her as a woman of exemplary piety, constantly engaged in fasting, worshipping, and helping others. Imam Ali al-Hadi, the 10th Imam, peace and blessings be upon him, would later say of his own mother, "My mother is the one who has profound insight into my right, and she is from the people of paradise. A rebellious Satan cannot come near her, nor can the deception of a stubborn tyrant reach her. She is protected by the eye of God that never sleeps." And the reference, of course, is in the write-up. This testimony from an infallible Imam reveals her intense and immense spiritual station. She was not merely a wife, but a divinely protected vessel, chosen to nurture the next proof of God. This reality connects to one of the most profound statements about the Imamah, found in the sacred text of Ziyarat Waritha, where we bear witness to the purity of this sacred lineage. In Ziyarat Waritha, there is a line which says, "I bear witness that you were a light in the sublime loins and the purified wombs." The mothers of the Imams are not chosen by accident. They are selected by God for their purity, to be the sanctified ground in which the seed of divine light can be planted. Ayatollah Jawadi Amali explains, the selection of the mothers of the Imams is as divinely ordained as the selection of the Imams themselves. He says, just as the Imamah is a divine and appointed station, the mothers of the Imams must also possess the capacity to receive this divine light. This capacity is piety and inner purity, not worldly status or lineage. God selects the purest of wombs for his wali. This is a creative, existential principle, asla takwini, within the system of Imamah. This principle stands as a powerful rebuke to the worldly logic of the Abbasids. Ma'mun chose his daughter for political gain, but his choice remained spiritually barren. God then chose Sayyedah Sumanah for her piety, and her union with the Imam was blessed with the greatest of fruits, the continuation of the holy lineage. It was she who became the mother of Imam Ali al-Hadi, peace and blessings be upon him, the 10th light of guidance. Let's now look at our final call to clarify: purity over power, piety over pedigree. Here, a vital clarification emerges. The story of these two wives reaches us as a timeless lesson about God's value system versus that of the world. The world honors political power, royal pedigree, and strategic alliances. But the divine gaze looks upon the heart. God's sacred trust of the Imamah is nurtured not in the wombs of princesses chosen for political ends, but in the purified wombs of women chosen for their piety and their devotion. Our duty is to clarify that true nobility lies in nearness to God, not nearness to the throne or to power. We must honor the legacy of women like Sayyidah Sumanah, whose spiritual substance outweighed all the superficial status of the royal court, and who teach us that the continuation of God's light on earth is a matter of purity, not of power. Please give me a salawat and we move to the conclusion and the martyrdom of the generous Imam.
اللهم صل
صل
على
على
محمد
وآل
وآل
محمد.
محمد وعجل فرجهم.
So concludes our journey into the fortress of the Hirz. We began with its story born from a time of fear. We delved into its theology, understanding it not as a talisman, but as a portable school of Tawhid or monotheism, a tool for refocusing the heart on God alone. And we ended with its spirit learning that its true etiquette is the inner sincerity that transforms a physical symbol into an active covenant of reliance. But a gift of such profound spiritual generosity can only be fully understood by returning our gaze to the giver. The Hirz was a manifestation of the soul of Imam al-Jawad. His entire life, his wisdom, his courage, his generosity was a sanctuary for the believers. It was this spiritual gravity, this innate ability to draw hearts to the truth and provide them with refuge that made him an intolerable threat to the Abbasid regime. The Khalif al-Mutasim, the successor to Ma'mun, saw that neither the gilded cage of the court nor the constant surveillance could dim the Imam's growing influence. He recognized that as long as the Imam lived, the legitimacy of the Caliphate of the Abbasids would always be in question. Unable to defeat him in debate or to discredit him by character, the state resorted, or the regime resorted, to the familiar, cowardly weapon of tyrants, the weapon of poison. Tragically, and in a devastating sign of the court's corruption, the instrument of this crime was the Imam's own wife, al-Fadl. The great early scholar al-Ayyashi narrates the painful details of this betrayal, an account preserved by Allama Majlisi in his monumental work, al-Bihar al-Anwar. Ayyashi narrates through his chain of transmission that al-Mutasim was constantly devising plots to kill Abu Ja'far, that's Imam al-Jawad, peace and blessings be upon him. He gave poison to al-Fadl, his wife, to place in some grapes. When he, the Imam, had eaten from it, she regretted what she had done and began to weep. So he said to her, "Why are you weeping? By God, he will strike you with a poverty that can never be mended and with an affliction that can never be concealed." And the reference is in the write-up. In the year 220 AH, in Baghdad, the life of the Imam of youthful authority was brought to a premature end. He was martyred at the heartbreakingly young age of just 25. He was killed not for any crime, but for the unforgivable offense of being a living proof of God in an era of falsehood. A system built on lies cannot coexist with an embodiment of divine truth. In this very act of treachery, we witness the ultimate failure of the Abbasid regime and their schemes. Their entire political project, symbolized by the marriage to al-Fadl, was to co-opt and control the sacred lineage. Yet the union remained barren, a dead end. God's plan, however, could not be thwarted. The light of Imamah was destined to continue, not through a princess chosen for worldly power, but through the purified womb of the devout and noble Sayyedah Sumanah al-Maghribiyyah. The Caliph's plot to weave his dynasty into the fabric of Imamah had failed. God's light would instead shine through a vessel of pure faith. This is the core lesson the tyrants of history never learn. The light of God cannot be extinguished by assassinating its bearer, nor can its path be dictated by their worldly schemes. The moment the soul of Imam Jawad ascended, the mantle of divine authority passed seamlessly to his young son, our 10th Imam, Imam Ali ibn Muhammad al-Hadi. In a stunning and powerful echo of his father's own story, Imam al-Hadi was himself a child, only around 8 years old, when he assumed the leadership of the Ummah, presenting the community with another profound test of its faith and loyalty. The struggle would not only continue, it would intensify. The confrontation would move from the capital Baghdad to the very heart of the Abbasid military machine, the new fortress city of Samarra. In our next session, God willing, we will begin our two-part series on the life of Imam al-Hadi, the first of the Imams to be imprisoned in the garrison town. We will witness how this young Imam navigated an even more intense siege, planted the seeds of a global network from within his confinement, and continued to pave the way for the era of the final awaited Imam. Please give me a salawat, and then we have the supplication eulogy for Imam Jawad, which is entitled The Covenant of the Generous Imam.
اللهم صل على محمد
وآل
وآل محمد وأجل فرجهم.
محمد.
In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. O God, send your blessings upon Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. Send peace upon the Imam of youthful authority, the ninth treasurer of your knowledge, the generous gateway to your mercy, Imam Muhammad ibn Ali al-Jawad. O God, we thank you for guiding us through his luminous, though tragically short life. We witnessed your wisdom manifest in a child. Your proof silenced the arrogant, and your light shine from within the gilded cage of a tyrant's court. O Lord, just as you made him al-Jawad, the generous one, we ask you to bestow upon us a portion of that generosity, a generosity of spirit to share knowledge, a generosity of courage to speak truth, and a generosity of heart to protect the vulnerable. Grant us the clarity he embodied, the clarity that distinguishes divine truth from pious hypocrisy. Grant us refuge in the fortress of his Hirz, not in its silver casing, but in its profound meaning, that you alone are our sufficiency, our protector, our light, and our proof. O God, our hearts ache for his sorrow, yet in the midst of this sorrow, we find solace in your perfect plan. For while he was betrayed by a wife chosen for worldly power, you provided for him a sanctuary of purity in the person of his noble wife, Sayyedah Sumanah al-Maghribiyyah. She was the purified womb you chose, the vessel of piety through whom the sacred light of Imamah would continue. Her legacy teaches us to honor the true believers, the true builders of our ummah, the righteous women who are the nurturers of generations. They are the first school of love, resilience, and faith. O God, teach us to honor the sacred station of the righteous women in our lives, our mothers, our wives, our sisters, our daughters. Expand our hearts to see every believing woman as our own kin. Let our salam to them never be an empty word, but a living pledge. Make our presence their sanctuary, our words their shield against dishonor, and our actions their fortress against all harm. Make us protectors of their honor and supporters of their sacred role, just as your Imam honored the station of his chosen ones. We lament the loneliness of a young Imam in a palace of enemies, and the poison of treachery that ended his life at only 25. We weep as Ziyarat Nahia weeps for his grandfather, for a sacred body left to the cruelty of his foes. And in our grief, we declare our eternal disassociation as taught in Ziyarat Ashura. O God, exclude from your mercy the first tyrant who wronged the rights of Muhammad and his family, and the last to follow him upon that path. O our Master, O Imam Jawad, we stand before you as the lamenter in Dua Nudba stands, crying, where is the remnant of God? Your life paved the way for the awaited one. Your great-grandson, Imam al-Mahdi, may our souls be his ransom and may God hasten his return. O God, just as you tested the Ummah with the youth of Imam Jawad, test us now with our steadfastness in the absence of your proof, of your final proof. Renew our covenant with him this morning and this afternoon and this evening and every morning, evening, and afternoon of our lives, as we pledge in Dua Ahad. O God, I commit to him my covenant, my allegiance, and my loyalty for as long as I shall live. Make us his helpers, his defenders, and those who hasten to fulfill his commands. And in waiting for his justice, make us agents of justice. Grant us the grace to stand with the oppressed of our time, especially our brothers and sisters in Palestine and Gaza, who face a genocide at the hands of the most deranged of your creation. Protect the children under the rubble, strengthen the hands of the resistance, and grant victory to those who fight for the honor of this ummah. O God, we disassociate ourselves from the silent and complicit and the hypocrites who arm the killer while weeping false tears for the slain. Grant us a footing of truth as we ask in Dua al-Qamar, alongside Hussein and the companions of Hussein, and alongside the martyrs of our own time, who have irrigated the tree of freedom with their sacred blood. O Lord, like the supplicant in Dua Kumail, we come to you with our faults and with our weaknesses. Forgive us our heedlessness. And like the seeker in Dua Abu Hamza, we know that the path to you is through you. Make the legacy of Imam al-Jawad a path to you. Make our lives the life of Muhammad and his family, and make our death the death of Muhammad and his family, and count us on the day the trumpet is blown among those among those for whom Imam al-Jawad asked for salvation. Amen, O Lord, sustainer of the universes. Amen, O most merciful of the merciful. وآخر الدعوان الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.